Can everyone hear me? Good morning, everyone. My name is Celeste, and I am a double winner. I know that that's probably a little bit not appropriate for Al-Anon, but I am. So, last night at the Al-Anon Al-Anon open meeting, our Al-Anon speaker came up here, and she was the sweetest thing, and she just burst into tears, and she got all of her emotion out of the way right away, and I'm like, maybe I could do that tomorrow morning and just get out of the way. Probably won't happen. I have had too many years of pushing down those emotions. Lucky girl, she's going to learn how to deal with them much sooner in life than I ever did. So when I was getting ready for my talk yesterday, I was looking for a bunch of books that I want to share with you as I do my talk, because one of the things that I've discovered in Al-Anon as I have begun working with people is that they go, well, what book is that? What book is that? What book is that? And so I just brought them along in order to kind of give some little visual aids. While I was doing that, looking for the books, I found my fourth step that I did about a year and a half ago on a family situation that was happening in my life that was challenging me in huge ways, with my control, with my Al-Anon program, with my inability to let go. And I went, oh, well, this is appropriate. So I read that step, and it kind of carried me through to how I was going to begin my talk this morning, because it really hit me between the eyes that that how long I have been codependent, and it began even before my birth. So and I wanted to show that the book that I was using to do my fourth step with is called Blueprint to Progress. So for any of you who have not done a fourth step through Al-Anon, this is a great book to use. And as I was rereading my fourth step yesterday, I was going through on the questions in this book and realized really how helpful that is for a guide. So that's book number 1 to share. And so back to that beginning of being in codependency before my birth. I was exposed to both my codependency and my addiction in the womb. My mother was alcoholic. She drank throughout my pregnancy and was also in the midst of her own personal trauma from losing her mother at age 2 and losing her firstborn at 9 months. So my mom was very withdrawn. She would very, very much held back her ability to make a connection with you. She was so terrified of being hurt and creating relationship with anyone. You know, she had lost her mom at 2, and then probably the person she would have ever loved the most in her life died at 9 months. So she, of course, fell more and more into her alcoholism. And then my dad grew up in a house with a mother who had some type of mental illness. Nobody ever really understood what her diagnosis was, because back in those days, it really was not talked about. It was just, you know, mom is having a hard day, you have to be quiet around the house. Sometimes my grandfather would invite us over, the grandkids, to help grandma get out of bed, you know, that kind of thing. So my dad grew up in that type of a household. So relationally, it was really hard for him to also make connections. He was a really great father. He was alcoholic, but he was not connected to us in a way that you know, I don't think my father ever called me once in my whole life. In the time, you know, from the time that I left home, I was always the one that made the phone call. You know, he didn't make those overtures, but he tried to show up the best that he could. So I grew up in this alcoholic home, learned how to not express my emotions because it just wasn't allowed. You couldn't be angry. You couldn't be afraid. You know, it was just, you know, go back to bed is fine. You know, and you never were angry. You'd get in trouble for that. You weren't allowed to my mom would call it being conceited if you dressed a certain way, or if you said that you looked nice, or that you did a really good job on cleaning your bedroom. She would say, well, we don't say things like that. That's being conceited. There's no humility in that. You know, so there was always sort of this pushing down, this unworthiness. And so I learned to become a martyr. I learned to become a victim. I learned to be silent. I learned to not talk. And there's a quote out there that I've seen recently on Instagram by Sharon Says So. She's a influencer, but the way she put it is, if the only way to keep the peace is to stay silent, then it's never peace. And that's pretty much how I felt growing up, is that I was silent, but there was always this undercurrent of fear and frustration and anger, and no way to express those emotions. As a result of that, at age 13, I picked up alcohol myself, and that helped me a lot to move through my anxiety, to move through my fears, to be a part of society, to not care so much. And so I used alcohol to manage my worthlessness and my anxiety and my fears. That developed into an addiction. That developed into how we all, you know, this isn't what this is about, but it is part of my story, is that my life was unmanageable, and I started to wonder how I was going to get sober. Started to pray about that, asked for help, and somebody in Alcoholics Anonymous came into my life, and we started to date. That also is part of my story. So we started to date, and well, I wasn't an alcoholic, right? You know, so if I'm not an alcoholic, I'll go to Al-Anon because I'm dating this alcoholic. And so that was where I went to my first Al-Anon meeting. So I came in the backside of AA through Al-Anon. And that helped me recognize my addiction as I started working my steps of Al-Anon. And it took me about a year to figure that part out. But I started to have a little foundation in Al-Anon. You know, I'd worked some of the steps. I had gotten through 4, which brought me to AA because I realized I was alcoholic. And I developed some really good relationships in Al-Anon that helped me a lot with my marriage. You know, because I walked into my marriage thinking it should be this wonderful white picket fence with the prince on the stallion saving my life and making everything just beautiful. And well, that didn't happen because that's not reality, and that definitely was an Al-Anon disillusion or illusion, right? And so the women in Al-Anon helped me realize that, you know, men are humans too, and that I needed to not expect him to make me happy. And that was foreign to me because I always thought other people were supposed to make me happy. And I have to find happiness inside of myself. I have to learn how to love myself. I have to learn how to do all of these things that I didn't know how to do. But my main focus for about 5 years of that part of my recovery was AA. And then at about 5 years of sobriety, things were kind of falling apart. You know, things were kind of not going very well, and I couldn't really figure out what was going on. It was about that time that adult children of alcoholics started to make an appearance out in the recovery world. And I didn't really think that my parents were that alcoholic, that I wasn't affected by their drinking. So I seen a therapist, and she was sort of like, well, maybe you should try it out. Maybe you should just go to a meeting, or, we could do some therapy on it, or there's this little treatment program you could go for a weekend. And I thought, well, what the heck, why not? And it was also at that time, we had recently adopted our first son. I had infertility problems, and I was still caught up in a lot of blame for myself on that somehow God was punishing me because I couldn't get pregnant, and just all of the guilt and shame attached to that somehow these things were my fault. So I went to the adult child meeting, treatment, and I was doing this therapy. I was at the treatment for a week. It was a week or a weekend, I can't remember because it was quite a while ago. And while I was there, I started not feeling very well. And we were doing a lot of processing on my guilt and my shame around this issue, around the infertility, around my relationship in my marriage, around my relationship with my parents, the guilt and the shame that I carried, this feelings of unworthiness, and so much healing was going on that I figured, some of this was not feeling well was part of all of that work that I was doing. I got home and I still didn't feel very well, and so about a weekend I took our son to the doctor for his well baby check, and I told the doctor how I was feeling, and he said, well, first thing we should do is run a pregnancy test. And I was like, okay. Not for a minute did I think that I was pregnant. And he was gone for a really long time. And finally he came in, and this was a facility that actually I worked for. I worked as a medical assistant in this doctor's office. And then he came in with like half of the staff. And he goes, "You're pregnant." And I was in shock. And in some ways I owe that weekend to moving through what I needed to move through in order to be a mother that carried a child. So that was one of the things that happened early in my recovery of adult children. And it's kind of a cool story to attach to it. So after I finished that treatment, and I proceeded to have 3 more children after that, but I was still working my adult child program. There were meetings, and I would go to the meetings, and built a core group of women that I became very, very good friends with, and was able to work through so many things that I had carried for so long in my childhood. And they helped me raise my children, these women did. They helped me sustain a long-term marriage, because a lot of times, at least for me as an adult child, I had a tendency to blame and accuse other people for my problems. And so there was this learning and teaching that you need to have a conversation, you need to communicate, that it's never just one person's fault, right? And so that helped so much with my emotional health for many, many years. The problem is I think, especially with Al-Anon, is that we can rest on our laurels a little bit, and I became so busy with my family and with things that I had to do. I started to work, that I stopped doing the things that I needed to do to take care of myself. I became too exhausted. I stopped taking care of my emotional health and my spiritual health. I was still going to a meeting a week, but things weren't going very well. I was having a lot of hormonal issues. I was, having periods of the month where I was enraging, at times just raging for a day or so. I was starting to have some physical outcomes due to my inability to get out of my fight, flight, and freeze. I was caught in my sympathetic nervous system. I was caught in this place of always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it started to show up in my body. I started to have pain in my legs and in my hips, and started going to the doctor, trying to figure out what was wrong with me. I was at times on crutches, at times wearing a leg brace, and was not doing well physically at all. So a bunch of tests were run. I had like this dye injected into my bones. I had testing where they test all of your nerves. I can't think of the name of it right now. I had MRIs. I mean, I had all kinds of stuff. And what they came up with is that I had reflexive sympathetic disorder, which basically means your sympathetic nervous system is in overdrive. And the neurologist sat me down and she said, the only way that we can treat this is with gabapentin, or Neurontin, she called it. And I just looked at her and I said, well, I'm not taking that. And I'm a recovering alcoholic, I'm not taking that. And she said, I figured you would say that. She said, so there's really nothing you can do. I was pretty angry when I left there. And I was scared because I didn't know how I was going to get well. So it was at that point that I started to really pursue step 11 and plugged in creating a relationship with my higher power. And I did that in a whole bunch of different ways. Unfortunately, it wasn't Al-Anon, but I was sober. I was still kind of working a program, but I started to really study different ways of finding a higher power that could support me in a way that would be loving and caring and return me to a place of being at peace and in serenity. And I found that through creativity. I found that through yoga. I found that through Reiki practices, which is like an energy healing. And I found that through prayer and meditation. Meditation became the practice that really helped me find patience and peace. And my family started to notice it. It was sort of like this switch had gone off. And it was like there was this mom and now there was this mom. And that was a true blessing, and that was a result of, I think, the 12 steps of recovery, no matter what they are. And I'm super, super grateful for that, because my family of four, pretty much, people would say, you have it so good. You're so blessed, you're so lucky. You have this loving husband, you have enough money, you have these 4 beautiful children, you have all of this stuff. And some of those things, the outside stuff started to crumble. And things started to change, and there were children in our lives that started to show up with this disease. And that was difficult. And I sure wanted to control that. I really, really, really wanted to control that. We had a daughter who ended up in treatment for her alcoholism. We had another daughter who was deep, deep, deep into her codependency. And our youngest son eventually also ended up with addiction and needing to find recovery. That was a lot to unpack and a lot to try not to get enmeshed in and not to become codependent in. And I wish I could say that I didn't, but I did. And I wanted to control a lot. I was always and continue sometimes to be that person that if you need my help, I'll be there. And I think sometimes I did that at the expense of my own health. I did it at the expense of my own emotional sobriety. Our oldest daughter had a lot of struggles with OCD and anxiety, and I would work all day in Appleton, Wisconsin, And then I would drive 2 hours to Milwaukee to spend the night with her because she couldn't sleep alone. And then I'd get up at 4 in the morning and drive back to Appleton, Wisconsin to go to work. And I would do that for months at a time. Probably pretty codependent, right? That was what I would do. I'm the mom. I'm supposed to help them, right? And and eventually she got through it and moved on with her life. She ended up moving out here and finishing school and becoming very independent and meeting a man and getting married and all of that kind of stuff. And so we launched her, right? Made it through, white-knuckled that one. And then my youngest daughter was in her codependency, moved in with us, and I have no regrets around that. She's sitting here, so I have no regrets around that. And she had our first grandchild, but that was a really difficult time to watch her suffer and work through her codependency and her trauma and the things that she had to deal with, and to try not to save her and try not to control it and try not to manage it. And actually, I don't think we did too bad of a job with that one. There were times, but again, I had to be there. I had to show up. I had to take care of my kid, and I'm grateful that we could do that. And I'm grateful that I got to grandparent my granddaughter in that time and be of support to my daughter. And then all of a sudden, all of us moved out here. It was my husband and I and Rachel and my granddaughter, and our other daughter was here. We were here, moved in October and December. Our youngest son came out here and collapsed and said that he needed help. So he moved here too and moved in. Again, here we are with Al-Anon, and I can remember his sponsor calling both you and I one night and saying, "I'll take care of him, you can butt out." And I was like, what? That was Dr. Don. He was a wonderful man, but it was good. It was a great reminder that I didn't have to be the one in charge anymore, and I think that really, really helped. And our son, Rachel, our older daughter, our oldest son is adopted. He doesn't have any of these isms. He's fine, he's in Chicago. So, everyone launched. They've gotten married, they have children, they have their families. So things are good, right? We're doing great. We're doing great. I don't need to go to an Al-Anon. I've got my AA, I've got this, I've got that. Things are fine. I don't even know what time it is. Well, you guys wave me down if it gets too late. So 2 years ago, this disease reared its ugly head. And me being the mom that I am, I haven't really gotten better. I haven't really worked my Al-Anon program. I've just kind of done it piecemeal and in patches, using my AA to kind of get through. And this disease struck square into the middle of our home. And I became really out of control. As the chaos grew and became worse and worse, people in this program became concerned for me. And there were people saying to me, "You need to get help. You need to go to Al-Anon. You need to step back. You need to stop controlling." A couple of my children came to us and said, "You need to detach. You need to kick this person out. You need to do some things or you are going to die. You are really, really sick. And I was shocked. I was really, really shocked. And I was really resistant. The last thing I wanted to do was go to an Al-Anon meeting. And I was like, well, they're not going to help me. They're not going to change this situation. It's not going to get fixed. Well, you know, that I had to learn, well, that's not the point of Al-Anon. That, you know, that's just not the point of it. So this is where I get to pull out my book. So I wasn't going to go to an Al-Anon meeting because there's really no good Al-Anon here, and I don't have time because I'm really busy. So the first thing I did was get how Al-Anon works, right? So I did have one of the people that was concerned about me. She was the one that said, get this book. And I was like, well, which book is it? And she said, I want you to read the slogans every day for a month. So I did. I thought, I can do that. And so I read them every month, and then I started to read the book. I did read this whole book, and things started to sink in. As I was reading this book, there was a lot of referencing in the book. So the next book I got was In All Our Affairs. Now this book is really, really old, and there's some things in here that kind of didn't sit right, but there was a whole bunch of things that did. And so this book I started to read a few pages after I read the other book every morning. Then I also read the daily reflection stuff, you know, the Courage to Change, the One Day at a Time. I can't remember the little blue book. What's that? Hope for Today. So I would read one of those. And then I also, on my phone, see if I have that in here. I do. There's the Al-Anon forum, and I still read that every day. You can get that in the Al-Anon website and read that every day. So I read that every morning. And things started to sink in. Final book I got was the Al-Anon Steps, Traditions, and Concepts. And the cool thing about this book is you can read the step, there's some stories, and then there's a bunch of questions to answer. And so I started doing that, and I was starting to have some awakenings, and I was starting to realize what I was doing and how it was affecting me, and that I couldn't change this person, and that I couldn't change her relationship with another person, and I couldn't save anybody. And that's been super helpful. It's been super, super helpful. I still sometimes want to get into that, but Al-Anon thankfully pulls me back. I did get a sponsor in Al-Anon. She's in Phoenix, and I talk to her once a week. And she helps me a lot to, you know, I'll process all these stories that I run through my head about how I'm going to change the situation that still isn't changed. And she'll go, okay, let's read this, or let's talk about this. And that's been a real blessing. And then I started going to the Sunday morning meeting at Safe Harbor. It's one weekend it's Al-Anon, and one weekend it's AA. And so I've been attending that for maybe a year now. I've been going to that meeting, along with a online meeting on Fridays. That's real early in the morning, that's out east, and I've been going to that meeting. And I've been slowly, very slowly, getting some of my sanity back. Very slowly. But these books, for me, right now, are a daily resource. I read at least one thing every day that's related to Al-Anon in order to stay out of other people's business and stay in my own business. So yeah, I know there's more here. And I think some of the things that I learned a lot in this last year and a half is how passive-aggressive I had become again, how much anger I have been pushing down, and my unworthiness had trickled back up in a big way. And so I was trying to manipulate and control people, places, and things in order to feel better. And I don't like being that way. I don't like trying to have situations or people validate me into being the kind of person that I know that I want to be and that I can be. And so Al-Anon has reminded me and helped me a lot with stopping that behavior. So the other things that I've been doing really regularly is having a prayer practice. I do that every morning. I still get into little arguments with God. It's like, God's like, it's my will, not yours. It's, you can let it go, let me be in charge. And I was like, well, you aren't doing it fast enough. You're not doing it the way I want. And I have to step back and say, I guess I don't get to decide. And the situation may never, ever change, but I can change. And that I'm going to be okay even if it doesn't. The other thing that I've been doing really often is gratitude. And I was just recently at a meeting, and I don't remember which one it was, but the talk was on gratitude. And that if I always can come from a place of gratitude, everything else falls away. And it's so very, very true. And so that's the other thing that I do every morning is run through, write a list of gratitudes. And some days it's always the same thing, and some days it's something new. And it shifts things in such a big way. Last night when I was leaving the meeting, and I don't know if anyone else noticed the beautiful sky that was with the sun setting and the little sliver of a moon in the sky, and I was just feeling such gratitude of that, that I could just be there to witness that. Those are the things that have changed over the last year as I've worked this program, because I couldn't see those things. I just was so consumed with the obsession of trying to make this situation change that all of the joy was gone from my life. And I was putting people through a lot by my obsessive ruminating and trying to figure it out. I'm learning to give myself grace that I'm going to screw up and I'm going to fall back into it. People are going to ask me a question and I'm going to go, oh yeah, and go back into the drama of it, and then I start to feel icky, and I'm like, no, I got to step back. And so I'm learning to let go. I'm learning to try to avoid that situation. It's been really hard. I'm also reminding myself over and over and over again to love and appreciate all of the people that are in my life, my family that is still here, my grandchildren that are still here, my husband, all of you, all of the women that I work with in this program or work with me. I'm just so blessed to have that in my life and to allow myself to have that focus instead. Almost every evening I get to take a walk with my daughter and grandchild. What a blessing. I get that I have that opportunity. Not a lot of people have that. Just those little things. So I want to share the last paragraph of my fourth step that I wrote a year ago. And this was where I was at that time, and where I really knew that I needed to work on my program. Anger and resentment only hurt me, physically and mentally. It doesn't heal the situation or bring me closer to God. I need to forgive these behaviors to bring back joy and my purpose in life, which is healing and light. because I am struggling with my relationship and trusting God. It is very hard for me to accept this situation and this illness. And I wanted to share that because that's really the crux of alcoholism, this disease, and being caught in the codependency. And I don't want to be that carrier of anger and resentment. The other thing that I read, I get the Richard Ward's meditations in my email, and this week has been on rage and anger. And the theologian Megan maybe Watterson, talks about rage gives us clarity when our boundaries are being crossed, a rage that gives us critical information that we're in danger, that someone is harming us or someone we love. Or when we're witnessing an injustice. Sometimes we can call that sacred rage. And it depends on what we do with it, right? So staying in the sacred rage and transforming it into love and into well-being, into action, compared to the rage of revenge, which is where I was. I wanted to get revenge. I wanted to make that person pay. But what was that going to help? It was only going to hurt me at the end of the day, or someone else. So I'm learning that my anger isn't bad. It's just that it needs to be felt and then transformed. It doesn't mean that I act on it. It doesn't mean that I hurt someone because I'm angry or resentful or hurt myself. It means that I have work to do and that I need to continue to build my relationship with my higher power. And I think there was one final thing that I wanted to share. We might be ending a little early, but not a lot. This is from In All Our Affairs, that book that I showed you. Old resentments will interfere with my serenity today. Perhaps it is time to let them go. Thank you.